Welcome to our first season of the podcast, Grow from Darkness. We are your hosts, Amanda Blackwood
and Chrysanthi Dokos from Coast to Coast. As some of our listeners know, we're both survivors of complex trauma, and it's our mission to help others experiencing similar issues.
This season, we're going to be digging into trauma reactions, their long-term consequences, and how we fight back to live our best lives.
Yeah, every time you share something, the more and more I'm inspired by you. And I know that's hard for you to hear, but... Hi, Amanda. It's so wonderful to be back here again talking with you. This week, we're talking about the need for control as a trauma response. And we're going to cover, what it is. We're going to cover how it affects us and the long-term consequences of that. And we're also going to talk about how we deal with that. And hopefully by the end of this session, our listeners will be able to have a clearer picture of what we mean by needing for control, or the need for control as part of a trauma response. And how are you today?
I am fantastic. How are you doing?
I'm doing well. Yeah, the sun's shining, skies are blue. What more could I ask for?
Life is a beautiful thing when things are going your way.
Absolutely, they are. Yes.
And what helps them to go your way? That need for control. It all circles back around to the actual subject. It seems like every single time we talk.
Of course it does. Of course it does.
So I had
everything is scripted that we say, of course, isn't it?
Oh, sure it is. So I've had some interesting issues with the need for control lately myself. Just throwing one out there, as you know, my chronic hives have returned. And in my overwhelming desire and need to control the situation, I kind of maybe overdosed on antihistamines, which is not a good thing. And I caused some pretty nasty stomach problems for myself while I was on a road trip. I was down in New Mexico and staying in a hotel and was violently ill for about 24 hours. And my husband and I were supposed to be spending this time as a romantic getaway.
Amanda, that's awful.
Yeah, you can imagine that probably did not work out like we had planned.
No.
Oh, don't ever take that many Allegra or Zyrtec together.
And you know what? That is actually one of the characteristics of a person that needs to control by sort of overdoing things. So, but before we head into the characteristics and examples of the need for control, maybe we can talk about where it comes from first, as in terms of the trauma, the fight-flight mode. Would you like to go into that?
Well, from what I was reading, the third stage of trauma is bargaining, and that is where the need for control comes from. So bargaining is a form of a need for control. So that desperate need to control our environment begins to manifest. It anchors deep into our subconscious, and even after we've graduated well beyond that bargaining stage of trauma. So the normal reaction to the helplessness and the vulnerability and all of that stuff that comes from having experienced trauma is the attempt to regain some kind of control. This is how a trauma brain seeks to rebuild a sense of structure in life.
Exactly. That's so true. And it goes back to what you were just saying a moment ago, being out of control and feeling helpless. So essentially victims of trauma get to a point where they feel like they're totally powerless in any situation. And especially when it's been like chronic trauma, like, in our examples, personal examples, you with the human trafficking, me with domestic violence and narcissistic abuse. You feel like you actually don't have any power to stop what's going on or change your circumstances, don't you?
Oh, absolutely. This is common amongst people who've experienced abuse, neglect, violence. things that you and I have never been through, and everything that we have.
Mm.
Um, Trauma survivors usually often believe that what happened to them was somehow their own fault. And we've talked about that previously.
Yes.
Uh,
Yes.
they think that it was something that they did to encourage or allow the trauma to happen to them, and that they could have prevented it from happening if all they had was more control over the situation.
Mm. Mm. So it's like a self-protective mechanism, really, isn't it?
Right.
Because they haven't been able to, in these traumatic situations, to stop what was happening or change what was happening. And so moving forward, there's this overwhelming urge to exert control over everything in their lives. And in an ironic way, that can actually lead to more problems.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely. I can fully remember multiple times that I've lost connection with friends because of my need for control. Yeah.
Talk
And
me through that. Can you think of an example? Like, how did you need to control the situation, and what impact did that have on the friendship?
I was very good friends with a man that had a couple of kids out in California. And I used to go over there just about every weekend and hang out with them. It just became this regular routine. I
Mm-hmm.
fully expected this to be a routine. And one Friday, when I was driving over there after work to go and hang out and spend some time with the kids, I sent a text message that said something about, I'll be there in about 20 minutes. Well, he responded with, beware. Oh, to your house. Why? Because it's Friday. But we're in Montana. I got very upset. I was pissed.
I
It's
can
like,
imagine.
you didn't even tell me that you weren't going to be home before. You didn't ask for my permission to go on your family vacation, is what
Exactly.
it turned out to be. That
That's
was
it.
my need to control everything.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. I hear you. They can't do that. That's not right.
That's not the routine.
Exactly. It's not.
we
It's
we
just
have a
not.
routine. This is the safe routine. This is how it works. This is how life is supposed to work.
Yeah. Yeah. So that actually is an example of like very rigid boundaries. Uh, you have to. It was the set routine, and that's it. There was no possible other outcome than you going there every Friday.
Right. Right. Exactly. And if there was ever going to be a different outcome from that, he needed to ask my permission because
Mm,
it was my life too.
mm,
And
mm.
that's not how it works.
No, it doesn't. But when you are a trauma victim and you have that need for control, that setting those rigid boundaries about how your life works is like a classic characteristic of the experiences that some of us who are trauma survivors might have.
Right. Right. And there's so much that goes into the subconscious of these controlling behaviors too. Typically, when someone believes that it's within their power to prevent trauma from ever happening to them again, by correlation, this means that they also believe that being traumatized in the first place was their own fault.
Mm, mm.
This is a really harsh realization for most people. Most people who have a need for control don't even realize that they might still harbor self blame.
Yeah.
It might be buried really deep inside their subconscious. But if they have that need for control, this is probably why.
Mm, mm. Yes.
Uh-oh. Uh-oh. Am I seeing a little bit of that in you, maybe?
I don't know whether I feel like I might have shared this example in the past. I can't remember now. But my sister once told me that she would come in and change the way that I had placed the cushions on my sofa one day just to do my head in, because whenever she came, she moved the cushions, and she would laugh at me because I had always had them in this one particular way. And I said to her, you can't do that. And she wound me up so much, teasing me, that I ended up in tears, thinking that she was going to break into my house and move the cushions.
Oh, my.
She just thought, I was absolutely nuts. And for me, it was total. It was a trauma response. It was this need for control, and I can see it now, but at the time I certainly couldn't.
Yeah.
Certainly couldn't.
Have you talked to her about it since then? Have you told her about what you've learned about trauma recovery and what that was?
Actually, I haven't. That's probably a really important thing to do.
Yeah.
I hadn't considered doing that. Thank you. I'm going to write that little note down to myself. Talk to my sister.
Yeah. Yeah. And that need to control, man, it comes up at some of the most awkward times too.
Yes.
Yeah.
Have you got something in mind there?
I do, but it's not PG.
Oh, okay. Okay, well.
So I'm going to leave that one alone.
Maybe then we can move on to the next example of like a characteristic that somebody who has a need for control might display. And that is being very reluctant to share personal information, and like they're really private with people. I'm not like that. I used to be an oversharer. I'm toning that down now, but I suppose this is a vehicle for me to share to the world. Quite ironically. Anyway, getting back to the point, I had a friend who was very, very secretive, and she would ask you the most invasive questions, yet if you turned around and asked her the same, she would just clam up. It was really fascinating to watch, and it used to really irk me. But now when I look at it in this context, it makes so much sense. Like, she has experienced so much extreme and chronic trauma in her life that not sharing details is her safe space.
Right. And that happens to a lot of people.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's also important to note that it's not just trauma survivors who exude this need for control. This is also a common tactic amongst the abusers.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And we can look at it and we can try to analyze that all we want and say, well, if they have this need for control, there is maybe a chance that they've been traumatized in the past, and that's where this need for control comes from. Maybe. But if they're abusive, it doesn't matter. You just need to get out.
Exactly. Yes.
Yeah.
I mean, it is true that people who do abuse have been abused. The evidence
to some degree. To some degree. Yeah. I mean, you can take people like Jeffrey Dahmer, for instance, who was one of the most well-known serial killers here in the United States, had no history of actual abuse in his life. There are some people who just delight, and they're sadistic. They delight in hurting other people, and they don't have to have experienced it to be one of those people. But whether they have or have not been injured themselves in the past, it's not our place to fix them either.
Well, I think it's interesting. I was reading something the other day, the difference between a sociopath and a psychopath, and they say that psychopaths are born and they actually have no empathy whatsoever, and so that's where you get the serial killers, from my understanding of what I was looking at. Yeah. But we are digressing. We are digressing.
We are, and we have 15 minutes left in our episode. We're halfway there already.
Wow. So let's go back to the reluctance to share personal information. So one of the things about people who have experienced trauma, one of the things they really want is connection. But by being so reluctant to share personal information, they're actually distancing themselves from other people anyway. So
Right.
it's like a discombobulated way of being in the world. And that's also that leads me into another example of a characteristic of people who have that need for control. Their past is off limits, so they refuse to talk about it or even think about it because they're fearful that it may trigger something if they relive their past experiences. And I know personally, I think I've said before that I had experienced a really extreme sexual violent thing in my early 20s. And as a result of that, I didn't speak about that for years. I kept thinking I need to go and do some counselling about this, but I was too frightened. I was too frightened of going back into that space and completely and utterly losing control. It scared me to my very core.
Right. And that links right back to the bargaining stages. If I don't talk about this, then I won't remember it.
Yes. Yes.
Yeah. And I can honestly have yet another personal experience tied to this, not with my own inability to talk about it, but the anger, the absolute visceral anger I received from someone that I had thought was a dear friend when I came out about my own past. And I started talking about being a survivor of human trafficking.
Mm-hmm.
She cornered me at a public event and screamed at me, "You have to stop talking about this. All you're doing is making it worse for everybody else who's ever been through trauma. You have to stop talking about this." And I didn't understand at the time that what she meant was that I was trauma vomiting.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't even realize at the time that that's what I was doing.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
But she had an extremely traumatic past of her own that she was not willing to face, and she didn't want to talk about it. And every time she heard me talking about mine or posting about it on social media, it would bring up some horrible memory for her, and she would end up having like a miniature breakdown.
Yes.
And that's a horrible place to be. She didn't want to talk about it. I don't think she's ever gotten the therapy and the counseling and stuff that she probably needs from everything that she's been through. And I have names to give her if she ever decides that she wants to. But this is her form of control. This is how she controls the situation, is by pretending it doesn't exist, which is also denial.
Mm. Exactly. It certainly is. It's all very interrelated, isn't it?
Yeah.
Yeah. So another example, do you want another example for the need for control?
Yes, I love the examples.
Being avoidant of intimate relationships. It's sometimes very hard to get to know people who have this need for control, but it's their way of safeguarding being hurt again.
Right. Right. They close down because they have this fear that if they get into this relationship with this person that they find that they really like, then eventually they're going to need to know why something is triggering. And that means they're going to have to communicate with them, and they're going to need to tell them the story.
And that's, again, what they're afraid of. That's what they're afraid of. Yeah. So one of the other ones that I was looking at was believing the worst in most situations, because they've had misplaced trust that led to the traumatic experience in the past. And so they're afraid of making that mistake again. And I can't think of a specific example, but I know that I've been there. If something went wrong, I'd automatically assume the worst and catastrophize things in my head.
I still do this to a lesser degree. So If I don't hear from my husband and he comes home late from work,
Mm-hmm.
if it's more than 30 minutes or so, I start to panic and I try to rein myself in and keep control over myself. There's a control again. So
Mm-hmm.
that I'm not blowing up his phone and saying, "Where are you? I'm so scared."
Mm-hmm.
But automatically, what I'm fighting against is my brain saying, he's the one wonderful thing that you have in your life that you're not willing to ever give up or lose. And he's just been taken away from you because he's been in a car accident.
That's a horrible feeling.
It is. It is. And he gets that. He's pretty conscious of whenever he's going to be late home. Now he'll send me a text message or something to let me know, "Hey, I just left. I'm going to be a little late. Sorry." Something along those lines. And it's, for one thing, it's very respectful to do that because most of the time I'm working on dinner when he's on his way home. But it's also really helpful for a trauma survivor. This is a great way of being able to support somebody who has been through massive amounts of trauma, is to have that communication to let them know what to expect from you.
Mm-hmm. That's very important, that being open and honest and communicative in such a way that allows the couple or, the friends, whatever, if people understand where you're at, they're more likely to support you. If they don't understand, then they themselves start making questions and, what's going on here? Why is she trying to control me? Why is she trying to do this? It's
Right.
Doesn't make sense. But it's often a matter of being aware, isn't it, that that's where you're at in order to be able to articulate it.
Right, absolutely. And if you're not familiar with it as being a trauma response, you're not going to be aware of it.
No.
And I think that's why I ended up starting to do all this research in the first place, is because I wanted to know, what is it that I'm doing? Why am I acting this way? Because this isn't who I think I am. And it doesn't make any sense to me. And looking into all this stuff and learning what I have about behaviors and about trauma responses has been one of the most healing experiences of my life.
Yes. I mean, knowledge is power.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah. An interesting one, that another way of like characteristics that someone might experience, is one that I have found in terms of myself and other people who have been traumatized reacting to me. And that is this sort of really being unrelenting around loyalty. So you're either on my side or you're my enemy.
Mm-hmm.
You sort of really fear being hurt by others. And so when you are let down, even in like a minor way, it can be a total deal breaker in the relationship because you feel like you can't trust the person.
Yep, absolutely. It's you're either with, and we hear this all the time in movies, but when we start thinking in those linear terms, it gets kind of scary and dark for us.
Yes. I mean, I remember an example where one woman who had gone through the most horrible things, we were getting together quite regularly and sort of building each other up. And at this particular time that I'm referring to, I was struggling. I was really struggling myself. And also my daughter was struggling with some things. And I was supposed to meet her this particular morning and I just couldn't. I didn't have it within me. And I sent her a message and said, "Look, I'm really sorry. I'm going to have to, reschedule. Something's come up." And she just lashed out at me and said, "I can't trust you. You've let me down. I need somebody who's going to be there when I need them. Our friendship's over."
Yep,
Okay.
I've experienced those.
Okay. What can you do? What can you say to that? Yeah. We can only give what we can give. We can only share what we can share. And when people who have a need for control like this demand more of you, it's really hard. It's really hard.
Absolutely. And it's important to have those healthy boundaries too. You recognize right away, hey, this isn't healthy. I can't do
Mm.
this. You
Mm.
know, she wasn't in the same place as you were in the healing journey. And a lot of times when you, let's say, hitch your wagon to that horse, it's going to drag you wherever it wants to go.
Yeah, yeah, that's
Sorry, I've
right.
been watching a lot of Westerns lately.
I know you like them, don't you?
It's my
And,
favorite.
and that leads me to the next example I was going to raise today, which is having unrealistic expectations.
Mm-hmm. Yep. And
Because,
it
sorry, I
makes
was
it
just
so much easier to sever ties with somebody when they don't live up to your expectations, and that's having control over the relationship.
yes, yes, yes.
Yeah. Sorry, I had to throw that out there because I've done that one too.
Yeah. Well, you're demanding perfection from yourself and also from the other person because of this innate need to be in control and have everything predictable. Um, you demand this sort of perfection, which is crazy. Nobody
Right.
can live up to that. You can't live up to that. And no one else can either. And so it's easier to sort of, avoid situations than be abandoned.
Yeah.
And that's the last one I was going to highlight is that sort of fear of abandonment because people are unable to trust people in the past or they were exploited somehow. They generalize these feelings to current and future relationships. So
Yeah.
even if you're given the most contrary evidence to show that, this person isn't about to abandon you, you still are hypervigilant and look for all these little things. And, there's that mistrust again.
Right. Yep.
Yeah.
Yep. I don't need to trust you. You've let me down, which means
Mm-hmm.
I can walk away from this now.
Mm.
And it's such an easy way to sever those relationships. Like you were talking about earlier, it's hard to get to know somebody who's going through this.
Mm.
And this is just another tactic that a person can use to be able to make sure that that's impossible.
Yeah. Yeah. So long-term consequences are quite varied, but one of the key ones, I suppose, is isolating oneself from a whole range of experiences and people and living a very sheltered life.
Right, right. And another big one for me was the false sense of security. You know,
Yes.
you feel like you're in control, but that is absolutely an illusion. You might be in charge of how fast your car is driving, but you have no control over where the potholes are going to be or if you're going to get a flat tire on a nail. All you have control over is the gas pedal and the steering wheel.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That is so true. And that's one of the joys of life, that life is unpredictable. But as a trauma survivor, we cannot deal with that unpredictability. So,
Right.
yeah. Can you think of any other long-term consequences?
Um, it can make a survivor feel as though any kind of a change can be risky or dangerous. And
Yeah.
this can be really dangerous because it can leave somebody feeling, it can leave somebody in worse off positions. You know, as an example, we could live in a terrible neighborhood. I did when I first moved out to Denver for 3.5 years.
Mm.
Fear of moving because we at least know the neighborhood well enough to avoid the worst parts of it. You know,
Mm.
fear of moving is a real problem. I was in control because I knew that neighborhood and I knew what areas to avoid. I easily could have gotten out of there, simply moved to another area that would have improved my quality of life, improved my level of safety. But
Mm.
out of that fear of change and out of that fear of loss of control, it made that move feel impossible. I couldn't
Yes.
do that.
Yes.
So we can come up with excuses to not go through with it. Those excuses can leave us living in a very bad place, physically and emotionally.
Mm. Mm. Yeah. And speaking of being in a bad place emotionally, one of the outcomes of this need for control can actually be depression, anxiety, and developing a whole range of other mental health issues, because life is unpredictable, and when something unpredictable happens, it causes us to go into a panic, and we can be in that hypervigilant state that we've talked about in earlier episodes. And as we said in earlier episodes, that hypervigilant state then can lead to a whole range of physical health issues as well as psychological issues. So autoimmune disorders is one example.
Yes, and I've had some major deals with having to deal with that one recently.
Mm.
So my autoimmune issues that I've had, you're aware of the variety. But yeah, this is something that when they creep up, when they find their way into your life, you can't heal them. You cannot get rid of them. You might be able to send them into remission, but there's no known cure for autoimmune diseases. So this is a major consequence of not fighting back against it. We have to be able to figure out how to fight back against this need for control, or in other words, take control of the situation of the need for control.
So again, I think it comes back to what we've talked about before, Amanda, is recognizing the behaviors in yourself, being self-aware and doing things about it. And that can be as simple as, self-talk, to actually seeking out therapy, because once you start experiencing therapy, those little blocks that are in your major blocks that are in your life actually start to fall away, and you do start feeling like a whole human being that's not constantly walking on eggshells and looking behind them to see what's about to come and attack them.
Right. Yeah, and it seems so strange and so counterproductive. But acknowledging, first off, going back in our mental states, acknowledging that we were powerless to prevent whatever it was that happened, undoubtedly helps us to move away from that hypervigilance.
Yes. Yeah.
You're going to be able to exist with the current thinking and feeling rather than focusing on the past thinking and feeling, even when you don't realize that that's what you're doing. And so many people think that being able to accept the feeling of knowing that you are powerless is called acceptance, but that's actually not what it is. It's not a form of giving up or giving in. You're not relenting to the abuse and saying that you aren't going to fight back against it anymore. You are acknowledging that it exists in your past. There's nothing you can do to change it now. And it's time to live a healthier life.
Yeah. And one of the things about that is self-compassion.
Right.
Being kind to ourselves and understanding that we use these behaviors as self-protective mechanisms, and we can unlearn those self-protective mechanisms over time. And overcoming trauma and this sort of behavior, the needing for control, is something that is going to take time. It's not a quick fix. And that's where the self-compassion comes in, being kind to yourself, being understanding, and giving yourself the time and space to heal from the past.
Right. I mean, the harsh reality is that most of what happens in our life is not in our control. It's like the analogy of driving down the road. You're in control of your car. You're not in control of the other drivers. You're not in control of the conditions of the road. You're not in control of the wildlife that comes running out in front of your car, and you end up screaming at the deer because they're idiots. I mean, we actually had that happen this past weekend. One of the few things that we actually can start to control is how we manage what we are feeling. We cannot control what we are feeling, but we can control how we manage what we're feeling.
Yeah.
And I don't mean to force out negative emotions and only let the good things in. That's what we've talked about previously about toxic positivity. but rather it's quite the opposite. It's okay to feel joy, and it's okay to feel sadness or anger. And that's where the self-compassion, of course, comes in. But part of taking care of ourselves now is the act of setting boundaries for ourselves and knowing that what our current limits are, understanding what we need.
Yes. Yeah. So going back to my cushion example, I needed my cushions to be on the angle that they were in. And I needed to articulate to my sister that that's what I needed.
Right.
I mean,
exactly.
I know that's a really simple example and quite trivial, but being aware that that's what I needed, that was all that I needed to do in terms of my self-compassion, that it was okay for me to have my cushions like that.
Right. That's what you needed at the time.
Yeah.
And going back to my very first example with the friend of mine that had the couple of kids I loved spending the time with, all needed it in that situation to really be able to have a better response would be if he said, hey, I know you usually come over on Fridays. We're going to be out of the state. Something as simple as a little bit of communication would have gone a very long way in helping to support me. But he didn't realize that this was something that I needed. And I didn't articulate that to him as being my need.
Yeah. Well, on that note, Amanda, I think we've probably come to the end of our session today, have we?
I believe so.
Yeah.
And as always, a trauma-informed therapist can also be a great help if you feel like you're unable to travel this road by yourself. Just make sure that you find somebody that you're comfortable with. They can absolutely help with your need for control.
Yeah. Yes, definitely. So what have we got on next week? Can you remember? Because I certainly can't.
See, I have this handy little cheat sheet.
I love your cheat sheets.
Next time we are covering abandonment issues.
Oh my gosh. That is huge, that one. I think we could probably do about 4 episodes on that one.
We might need to. You can find out more about Growth from Darkness through the website www.growthfromdarkness.com. You can also learn more through the Facebook page, which can be found at facebook.com/growth from darkness. Thank you.